On most mornings, long before the day decides what it wants from you, there's a brief moment in the mirror when you rehearse your lines without even noticing. I'm a teacher. I'm an analyst. I'm a parent. The names change, the titles change, but the quiet performance doesn't. It's almost sweet, the way we cling to these labels, as if they could pin the vastness of a human being to a single sentence. And yet every time we introduce ourselves, something inside us flinches, just a little, at how incomplete it all feels. If you listen closely, there's a question hiding beneath the hum of daily life. A question so old we've stopped hearing how strange it is. Who are you? Not the name on your ID, not the role your colleagues recognize, not the story your family tells about you at holidays. Who are you when the noise settles and there's nothing left to perform? The world taught us early. Identity is certainty. Choose a label, wear it well, defend it fiercely. But certainty has a weight to it. And if you've lived long enough, you've probably felt the drag of it in your shoulders. The quiet exhaustion that comes from trying to remain the somebody you think you're supposed to be. Under all that effort, a quieter truth waits, one that doesn't need applause to feel real. Imagine, for a moment, all the labels falling away. Not in a dramatic collapse, but gently, like autumn leaves drifting off a branch that's ready for winter. What remains? A job disappears, and still you breathe. A reputation dissolves, and still you feel the ground under your feet. Even the thoughts that describe you shift and scatter like migrating birds. And beneath the shifting, you remain, unlabeled, uncontained, impossibly hard to explain. Don't answer the question yet. It's not a riddle to solve, but a doorway you've only just cracked open. If the things you say about yourself aren't the whole truth, if they're only masks handed to you by a world desperate to categorize, then a more interesting mystery unfolds. If the roles fall silent, who's left in the quiet? Hold that question gently. We'll return to it. Because the moment you stop gripping your story is the moment you feel something unexpected. The space beneath it, waiting patiently for you to notice. Identity is a clever architect. It builds walls so slowly, with such polite precision, that most of us don't realize we're living inside a structure we never consciously agreed to. It starts with simple things. Praise from a teacher, a nickname from a sibling, a compliment that feels too good to lose. Before long, those little moments harden into expectations, and expectations become a self you feel required to maintain. And maintenance. That's where the prison begins. You might recognize the feeling, the way you check yourself before you speak, the way you scan a room for approval like a lighthouse searching for shore, the subtle tightening in your chest when someone seems unimpressed or worse, indifferent. The world doesn't need to shout its expectations at you. The whisper of be somebody is enough to keep you running toward applause, running from disappointment, running in circles trying to prove a self-image that never quite sits comfortably on your skin. Yet there's an irony here. The identity you defend, the one carefully curated, polished, and protected, never feels as stable as you hoped. One small criticism can knock the wind out of you. One moment of being overlooked can open a quiet panic. If I'm not admired, who am I? Identity promises safety, but trades it for fragility. The tighter you hold it, the more easily it cracks. Pause for a moment. Let yourself acknowledge the weight of that. The exhaustion of managing how you're perceived. The late-night reruns of conversations that didn't go the way you wanted. The uneasy performing that happens even around people you love. No wonder we're tired. Carrying a persona is heavier than anyone admits. What's strange and strangely hopeful is that none of this struggle is evidence of failure. It's evidence of humanity. Everyone is trying, in their own quiet way, to be worthy of belonging. If, as you hear this, something in you softens, if you feel the sting of recognition, you can tap like gently. Not for me, but for yourself. An acknowledgement that you're not the only one tired of carrying a mask. But before relief comes truth, and here it is. Identity feels like a home you must protect, yet it behaves more like a cage you're afraid to leave. So the question becomes unavoidable. What exactly are you protecting? Your actual life or just the image of it? And if that image isn't truly you, then where did this whole structure come from in the first place? Long before we learn to speak in full sentences, the world begins whispering suggestions about who we are supposed to be. These impressions fall on us the way snow settles on a sleeping field, quietly, consistently, shaping the surface before we realize it's happening. A parent calls you the responsible one, and suddenly you walk a little straighter. A teacher praises your drawing, and the room decides you're the artistic one. Someone laughs when you're shy, and forever after you carry shyness like a coat you didn't choose but keep wearing because it fits the memory of who they said you were. Identity grows this way, not as a conscious craft, but as a slow accumulation of moments we never thought to question. As you move into school, the layers thicken. Grades translate your curiosity into numbers, and the numbers begin to sing a story, one that follows you long after the lessons are forgotten. Culture adds its own expectations, how you should behave, who you should admire, who you should avoid becoming. Even the gentle nudges from family, be successful, be strong, be polite, be better, sound harmless until you realize how many of those commands you've mistaken for an inner voice. Somewhere along the way, who am I quietly transforms into, who do they need me to be? It's subtle enough that you won't notice the difference until years later when you're exhausted without knowing why. But the truth is simple and unsettling. Much of what you call your identity was handed to you like a script for a play you never auditioned for. You memorized your lines, timed your cues, and tried to deliver the performance convincingly because approval felt like oxygen. And whenever you faltered, whenever you broke character, you felt a sting of shame that reminded you to stay inside your assigned role. It's no wonder we grow up mistaking the biography for the being. A map is useful after all, but it is never the landscape. So pause here. Let yourself feel the distance between the life you live and the story you tell about that life. If your identity is a script given by others, then a quiet miracle hides just beneath the question. If the story isn't the real me, then who is? And what happens when a person begins at last to step off the stage? Lena wakes every morning before the sun rises over Chicago's glass towers, her apartment still dim, except for the cold blue glow of her laptop. She moves like someone preparing for a role, selecting the blazer that looks most competent, fixing her hair just enough to seem effortless, rehearsing the email she will send before her coffee cools. To her team, she is the reliable one, the woman who never misses deadlines, who never breaks, who never asks for help. There is comfort in that identity. It fits her like a tailored suit. But inside her chest, something small and tight has been quietly asking for air. During the day, she performs with precision. Her smile is measured, her tone polished, her pace quick enough to signal capability but not urgency. Yet beneath the practiced calm, her mind runs its own frantic circuit. Did that comment sound smart enough? Did her joke seem confident or insecure? Did her colleagues notice the hesitation in her voice? Each interaction becomes a tiny exam, each expression a test she must pass. And when the day ends, she sits in the silence of her apartment, replaying these moments like a director reviewing footage, looking for flaws, for cracks, for anything that might betray the carefully maintained image she carries like a second skin. But tonight is different. Maybe it's the weight of another 12-hour day, or the way the cold wind howls between buildings as she walks toward the train. Maybe it's simply that the performance is becoming too heavy to sustain. She steps inside the train car and sinks into a seat by the window, letting the city blur into streaks of gold and shadow. And when she finally looks at her reflection in the glass, she doesn't see the polished professional everyone depends on. She sees someone tired, someone lonely, someone holding a mask that has begun to slip. Her jaw is tight. Her shoulders are raised as if bracing against an invisible blow. Her eyes carry a sadness she cannot name. For the first time in years, she wonders who she might be without the role, without the constant rehearsing, without the pressure to be somebody worth applauding. A single tear escapes, tracing a warm line down her cheek. It surprises her. Not because she's crying, but because it feels like the first honest thing she's done all day. And if you feel a quiet ache in your chest as you listen, if Lena's moment feels uncomfortably familiar, you can gently tap like. Not as a performance, but as a small promise to yourself that you see the mask, and you're beginning to feel how heavy it's become. What Lena doesn't yet know is that this tiny crack in her identity is not the beginning of collapse. It's the beginning of freedom. Because once the mask slips, even for a moment, something inside refuses to let it settle back into place. There comes a moment in every life when the mask you've been polishing for years begins to pinch. Not in a dramatic, theatrical way, but in the quiet discomfort of small truths you can no longer ignore. The strained smile, the practiced laugh, the way your shoulders tense whenever someone's gaze lingers a moment too long. The identity you believed was protecting you has, over time, started to feel less like armor and more like a doorway kept permanently locked from the inside. Yet beneath it, something tender continues to press forward, asking for even a sliver of air. If you look back, really look, you'll notice the times you felt most alive were the moments you weren't wearing anything at all. Think of it. The night you laughed so hard with friends that you forgot to monitor your expression. The morning you woke before your alarms, sunlight bleeding through your curtains, and felt a strange, undeserved peace. In the afternoon, you danced in a kitchen or sang in a car, or sketched on a napkin without caring who might judge the wobble of your lines. In those moments, you weren't a curated personality. You weren't a resume walking on two legs. You were simply here, unmasked, unguarded, unburdened. It's a quiet revelation, isn't it? Realizing that the life you long for is the one that arrives when identity loosens its grip. That the self you've been trying so hard to protect is actually the very thing standing between you and the effortless presence you taste only in flashes. There's a strange, soft truth to swallow. The mask didn't keep you safe. It kept you small. But letting go, that's the part that scares you. Not because freedom is dangerous, but because the familiar can feel safer than the expansive unknown. The ego insists. If you loosen your identity, you'll disappear. Yet every glimpse of freedom you've ever felt whispers the opposite. If you loosen your identity, you'll finally appear. So the question emerges, warm as breath on a cold window. What if the real you has been waiting patiently behind the mask this entire time? Hold that thought. Let it spread slowly. Because the moment you realize the mask is optional, something in you shifts, something spacious, something quietly radical. And it leads us to the deeper fear you've carried all along. Why does becoming nobody feel so frightening and so strangely compelling? There is a particular kind of fear that doesn't announce itself with panic or trembling hands. It arrives silently in the space between thoughts, like a shadow that doesn't quite match the shape of the body casting it. It's the fear of not knowing who you are without your story, the fear of stepping into a room without the familiar shield of your roles, the fear that if the mask slips, really slips, what's underneath will be too empty to bear. This fear doesn't shout. It whispers. And sometimes the whispers sound like truth. It shows up in the moments you lose something you once used to define yourself. A job ends, and it feels like a small internal death. A relationship dissolves, and suddenly the person you were in their eyes disappears too. A title no longer applies, and you feel unanchored, drifting. These are not just losses, they are miniature ego deaths, little collapses of the persona you've spent years maintaining. And without that persona, you feel naked in a way that no cloth can remedy. But here's the strange thing. The gentle truth wrapped inside the fear, the emptiness you dread isn't emptiness at all. It's space, spaciousness, the kind of open sky that reveals itself only after a storm has cleared the heavy air. The ego trembles at this openness because it knows it cannot survive there. The you that worries about opinions, that clings to narratives, that begs to be somebody. That version can't breathe in spaciousness. But the deeper you, the you that watches thoughts without becoming them, the you that has lived through every identity you've ever worn, that you thrive in it. If something in you softens hearing this, let it soften a little more. This is where courage reveals itself, not in becoming somebody extraordinary, but in allowing yourself to be nobody at all for a moment. And if this feeling stirs something warm in your chest, something like relief disguised as fear, you can subscribe gently, not as a gesture of allegiance, but as a quiet acknowledgement that you want to keep returning to conversations that don't demand your performance. Because this is the turning point. Once you see that the fear of being nobody is not a cliff, but a doorway, you start wondering what waits on the other side. What remains when the story dissolves? What expands when the self-image falls quiet? And what if the spaciousness you feared is exactly where your real life begins? If you sit long enough by the shoreline, you start to notice something the mind forgets. Every wave that rises is already on its way back home. It doesn't demand permanence or cling to the height it momentarily reaches. It doesn't panic as it falls or try to freeze itself in mid-crest to prove that it was once impressive. The wave knows something we rarely remember, that its shape is temporary, but its essence is not. What you are looking at is the ocean studying itself, forming a gesture, then letting that gesture go. And in this strange, quiet way, the ocean never loses anything. It simply changes its expression. We, however, do not take the hint so easily. We spend years gripping the edges of our chosen wave, our identity, as if it must never collapse, as if its collapse would mean our disappearance. The mind becomes preoccupied with keeping its shape. I must be this kind of person. I must maintain this reputation. I must not fall. And so we live as if life is a battlefield where only the strongest, most polished waves survive. But even the tallest waves break. Even the loudest waves are quiet, and still the ocean beneath them remains vast, untouched, undiminished. There is a warmth in this truth, a gentle humor even. The roles you fight so hard to preserve, the confident one, the shy one, the achiever, the caretaker, are nothing more than momentary dances of form rising and falling in the larger water of who you really are. The ocean does not take these roles personally. It enjoys them, then releases them. It does not despair when a wave dissolves. It doesn't cling when one rises. It simply continues, spacious and steady, welcoming new shapes without fear. Imagine living like that. Imagine meeting change the way the ocean meets weather, without resistance, without panic, without gripping for control. There is a softness available there, a relief in knowing you are not the wave trying desperately to stay tall. You are the water that has always known how to fall and rise again. When identity loosens, life becomes less like a performance and more like a tide. And the real question begins to emerge, curling at the edges of your awareness. If I'm the ocean and not the wave, how does life look when I stop fighting to maintain a shape and simply let myself exist? Marco had always been the talented one. At least that's what his team said in the bright, open-plan office overlooking downtown San Francisco. He carried that compliment like a secret weight, smiling when they praised him, pretending it didn't matter, when in truth it mattered more than anything. Each morning he stepped through the glass doors with his shoulders already braced, as if entering an arena where a single mistake could expose him as an imposter. His success felt less like a triumph and more like a fragile sculpture he had to protect from every possible crack. During meetings, he didn't listen as much as anticipated. He rehearsed brilliant answers in his mind, carefully shaping the wave he believed he had to be. The talented one, the rising star, the person whose value could never dip, even for a moment. Beneath the polished surface, his breath was shallow, his jaw taut, his pulse quick. He laughed at jokes a half-second too late, as if checking first whether a laugh was socially safe. This wasn't confidence, it was survival. And then came the promotion, or rather, the absence of it. The moment he read the email, something inside him sank, with a heaviness so complete it felt like the ocean floor. That evening, he found himself in a dim cafe near Market Street, the kind where old jazz floats from unseen speakers, and the lighting is kind to the lonely. His espresso sat untouched. In the window's reflection, he saw a man carved from tension, brows pulled tight, shoulders knotted, eyes full of a fear he had been outrunning for years. He whispered to no one in particular, "I don't know who I am without this." And there it was, the quiet collapse of the wave he had spent his adult life sculpting. What happened next wasn't dramatic. It was something far softer. In the days that followed, Marco stopped pretending to know everything. He began asking real questions, the kind that invited others to breathe. He admitted when he was unsure. He let himself laugh genuinely this time, without checking the room. Slowly, the people around him changed. Conversation softened. Collaboration deepened. He wasn't performing anymore, and strangely, everyone trusted him more for it. His work improved not because he was trying harder, but because he was finally present. If someone in your life is carrying the crushing weight of being somebody, you can share this video with them, gently, the way Marco learned to speak gently to himself. Sometimes one story is enough to loosen the grip on a lifetime of performance. There is a certain tenderness in discovering how often you narrate yourself without realizing it. Throughout the day, the mind slips into its old habits as casually as reaching for a coat on a familiar hook. I am anxious. I am overwhelmed. I am a failure. These declarations fall from thought to identity with shocking ease, as if the momentary weather of your inner world were the climate of your entire life. And yet most of these statements aren't truths. They're reflexes. Tiny cages built from language so automatic you rarely hear the door click shut. Take a moment and remember your morning. Perhaps you woke with a heaviness in your chest and immediately whispered to yourself, "I'm stressed." But look more closely. The body felt stress. The sky of you did not become a storm. Or maybe you experienced a burst of confidence after finishing a task and thought, "I'm killing it today." But confidence, too, is a passing cloud, not a permanent forecast. We imagine that naming these experiences gives us control, but more often, it gives us borders. Each I am becomes a brick in the small room we keep calling ourselves. Notice the subtle shift when you change the sentence. I am anxious becomes I am feeling anxious right now. Suddenly there is space, a breath of distance between you and the sensation. I am a failure softens into I am experiencing difficulty today. The difference seems delicate, almost trivial, until you feel how your chest loosens, how your mind stops gripping so tightly. You haven't erased the truth of the moment. You've simply refused to glue it to your identity. As you move through your day, listen for the places where you collapse into labels without even noticing. The moments you cling to old versions of yourself because they're familiar, even when they're heavy. The places where you run in circles trying to live up to who you've been instead of meeting who you are right now. This is the quiet, steady practice of being nobody, loosening the knot of identity, one gentle observation at a time. And yet, this is only the beginning. When the labels start to slip, when the identity begins to soften, a new space opens, one that feels strangely empty at first. But emptiness is never just emptiness. It invites something in. The question is, what unexpected gifts might appear in the space identity leaves behind? That is where we are heading next. Something magical happens in the space where identity loosens. It doesn't arrive with fanfare or sudden enlightenment. Rather, it unfolds the way morning light slips between curtains, slowly, gently, revealing what was always there. When you stop trying to be somebody, an entire world of possibility relaxes into view. Comparison, which once felt like a reflex you couldn't control, begins to lose its teeth. The scoreboard you carried, often unconsciously, fades into the background. You scroll past someone else's highlight reel, and instead of a sting, you feel a warmth, a quiet recognition. Their joy doesn't diminish yours. Life stops being a competition. It becomes a shared expression. Without the pressure to uphold a polished identity, something inside you softens. You listen more closely. You laugh more freely. You move through the day with a kind of unforced kindness, the kind that doesn't need anyone to notice. This is what happens when the ego loosens its grip. Motivation shifts. It stops running on anxiety. The fear of being irrelevant, unappreciated, unseen, and begins to run on curiosity, on love, on the simple pleasure of participating in life without performing it. Work changes too. Instead of strategizing how to look competent, you become genuinely engaged. Conversations deepen because you're not waiting for your turn to impress. You're simply there, present, porous. Creativity becomes play again, not a test you're terrified to fail. Even mistakes soften. They become part of the dance instead of threats to your self-worth. Imagine a day lived entirely from the inside out. A day where your actions come not from fear of judgment, but from the quiet knowing of what feels true. This is the gift of being nobody. Life stops revolving around your image and begins revolving around your experience. You meet people as human beings instead of as mirrors reflecting your value back at you. The world becomes gentler, and so do you. If someone you care about is tangled in comparison, or suffocating under the weight of being somebody, you can share this video with them, softly, the way you'd pass along something fragile. Sometimes a single reminder is enough to loosen a lifetime of striving. And a question begins to rise, no? Subtle, but persistent. If freedom feels this natural, how do we carry it into a world that still asks, so, what do you do? We'll go there next. There comes a time in every life when the roles you've worn start to feel strangely loose, like clothes that no longer match the shape you've grown into. And yet the world keeps asking you to wear them. Titles, introductions, small talk at parties. They all point toward the same expectation. Declare who you are clearly, confidently, and preferably in one sentence. The world likes its labels neat. It likes to know where to file you. And you, being human, learn to comply. At first it feels harmless, even comforting, to say, I'm an engineer, I'm a mother, I'm an artist. But over time, these labels begin to settle into the mind the way dust settles into corners, quietly, gradually, until you can't remember what the room looked like before. Still, something inside senses the truth, a whisper that comes late at night when the house is finally quiet, or in the morning when you wake before your alarms and responsibilities. These roles are conveniences, not definitions. They help you navigate the world, but they do not reveal you. They are costumes meant to be worn lightly, not strapped to the skin like armor. Yet most people forget this, and the forgetting is where the suffering begins. When a costume becomes a mask, when a role becomes a requirement, the freedom of being human begins to shrink. You start to perform instead of participate. You take careful inventory of how others see you, as though your reflection lived in their eyes instead of in your own quiet knowing. But imagine, just for a moment, a different orientation. What if identity were something you could pick up when needed and set down when not? A tool rather than a prison. A role you play with clarity, knowing you can step out of it at any time. There's a lightness in this way of moving through the world. You can be the doctor when tending to a patient, the parent when caring for a child, the artist when meeting a blank canvas, and then step out of those roles without losing yourself to them. Life becomes a kind of play, not trivial, but fluid, not careless, but free. If you feel called, you're welcome to share in the comments. Who am I when I stop performing? Sometimes a single honest line from a stranger can loosen the mask for someone else. And as we step toward the final truth, a new, quieter question begins to appear at the edge of awareness. When all the roles fall away, what remains? There is a certain peace that arrives only when everything unnecessary has fallen silent. It doesn't come with fireworks or some dramatic spiritual awakening. It feels more like an exhale you didn't know you'd been holding for years. It slips in during ordinary moments, washing dishes, sitting in traffic, hearing rain against the window. Suddenly, without effort, something inside unclenches. The need to be impressive relaxes. The need to be understood loosens. And in the space that opens, you feel it. The quiet recognition that you were never the role you've spent your life performing. You were the awareness behind it, watching the entire play unfold. It becomes almost funny, in a soft, affectionate way. All the years spent polishing an image, defending a story, arranging yourself like a resume in motion. You realize how much energy went into holding up a version of you that was never meant to be permanent. The truth is simpler, lighter, almost shy in its arrival. You are not the actor. You are the stage. The open space in which every version of you has appeared, played its part, and gently exited. Nothing was ever lost. The costumes changed, the essence remained. And when this is seen, really seen, the world doesn't become less vibrant. It becomes more. Colors feel cleaner. Conversations feel more honest. Failures soften. And joy expands into the smallest corners of the day. Life stops being a race toward significance and becomes something more musical, a rhythm you can sway with rather than chase. Alan Watts used to say, the point of music is not to reach the final note, but to enjoy the playing. And suddenly, the metaphor makes sense in your bones. You are not here to arrive. You are here to participate. So let yourself rest for a moment in this spaciousness. Feel the breath moving its ancient rhythm, the subtle hum of being alive without needing to justify it. This is the beauty of being nobody, the freedom to be everything, to be the sky instead of the clouds, the ocean instead of the waves, the vastness instead of the mask. And if something in this message felt like a doorway, if you sensed a truth you once knew but forgot along the way, you're welcome to watch this again. Sometimes a second listen is when the heart finally hears what the mind missed.